Cool. All right. My name's Dave Mawhinney, and I am the executive director of the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship. But more importantly, I'm an entrepreneur and an investor. I've started 5 different startups, and I've been a partner in a venture capital, corporate venture capital firm, and I'm an active angel investor. So I've been on both sides of the table. I'm a Carnegie Mellon alum. I love Carnegie Mellon, but more important than loving Carnegie Mellon, I love the people that come to Carnegie Mellon. So I'm so happy to meet you all virtually. We've had a couple of touch points at this point in time. The boot camp, we had Venture Bridge Demo Day that I noticed a lot of you attended. We've had other Connects workshops. We had a Swartz Leadership Speaker Series last night with Kalpesh Kapadia. That's cool. We have one coming up. We haven't announced it yet, but you'll get a little preview. We have Mark Cuban on October 16th. So we have some exciting speakers that are coming. Just for those of you who haven't heard this before, I'll be quick, but the Swartz Center is named after Jim Swartz, and that's Jim sitting in the middle of the table with the blue sweater. He is a Carnegie Mellon alum, Pittsburgh native, but more importantly, he is the founder of Accel Partners, one of the best venture capital firms that has ever existed. And if you don't know the firm, you'll know the companies that he's invested in. They were the first institutional investor in Facebook and the first institutional investor in Slack, amongst hundreds of other very successful companies. And Jim has given back to Carnegie Mellon by giving us a $31 million grant to build out these capabilities, because he believes, as I do, we are just as good as Stanford, we are just as good as MIT, we are just as good as Berkeley or Harvard, all of these other schools that are well known for entrepreneurship. And it's going to be you all building amazing companies that gets us to that next level. And as I look at this was, I think, the 2016 trek that we do with the Graduate Entrepreneurship Club and the Swartz Fellows, and I look in there, and Austin Webb is, the head that's peeking up on the left side of that picture in the back row. He's the guy that founded Fifth Season Robotany that just raised $35 million. Simon Kalush, he's on the right side, the 5th person in. He has a company called Nimble AI. He's raising a $50 million round right now. He's already raised over $10 million. Gautam Narang is on the far right, blue sweater. He did an AI autonomous vehicle company called Gatic, right? And they were just here a few short years ago. So this could be you in a couple of years if you lean in, you make the right connections, and you learn how to be great entrepreneurs. As I had mentioned, Austin, they're both named Austin, founded Fifth Season. It's right here in Pittsburgh, and we're going to do a field trip down there once COVID restrictions lift. It's just an absolutely amazing place. It's all up and running right now. You can buy their greens at Giant Eagle, and you can also get them online and have them delivered right to your apartment or to your home. What we're going to do today, as I said, we're going to talk about this framework that we use at Carnegie Mellon to approach building companies. And we developed this in conjunction with Innovation Works about 10 years ago. And it was part of a thing called the I6 Challenge, the Agile Innovation. And so these terms, lean startups and Agile, started to make their way into the entrepreneurial world about 10 years ago. And we're going to give you sort of the background for that and why it's important. We're also going to have an opportunity to see a couple of videos, one from Eric Ries, who coined the term the lean startup, and his book, The Lean Startup, is still one of the best books for aspiring entrepreneurs to read. And if we get time, we'll do a little case study with a CMU startup called 4Moms that applies robotics and low-cost electronics to baby care products. So it's really cool. Now, one of the things, and I'm dating myself because this was a TV show back in the 80s with Gary Coleman, whose brother was named Willis. And one of the top lines was, "What you talking about, Willis?" And the reason I put this up here is we get a lot of pushback from life science entrepreneurs or hardware engineers that say, this lean startup crap is just for, lightweight, software-oriented companies. And that's just not true. There's lots of good blogs out there that explain how hardware startups and life sciences startups have applied these lean startup concepts to be successful. And we've seen it at companies that have come out of Carnegie Mellon, like For Moms. This is their product, the Mamaroo. This company is approaching $100 million in revenue and very profitable, based right here in Pittsburgh. And in fact, a lot of Carnegie Mellon students have interned at this company. I happen to sit on the board of directors there, so I'm happy to make introductions if it's a company that you're interested in. Hannah Alexander and Matt Stanton created a company called Soul Power. They put a sensor into the heel of the shoe and used the kinetic energy of walking to turn it into electrical energy that can be stored in a battery, and has many, many different applications in outdoor adventures, but also in the military. They won the Invention of the Year award in 2014. And it can even be applied to physical consumer products. This is Meredith Grelly. Some of you may have met her already. She's also a CMU alum, and we're lucky enough to have her as a professor in the entrepreneurship program at the Swartz Center. She created an experience-driven CPG company around whiskey. It turns out that the Whiskey Rebellion was started right here in Pittsburgh over 200 plus years ago. We all hear of Trump doing his wild-ass executive orders. Well, the very, very first executive order in the United States was issued by George Washington to send the military to Pittsburgh to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. And if you haven't been to Wiggle Whiskey to hear the story, Wiggle was the head of the Whiskey Rebellion. And it's just a great experience. And you can see that you can build almost any kind of company if you apply these concepts. And if you take the courses here and you participate in the programs like the NSFI Core, you're going to learn these techniques. Okay? So what I like to do is I always like to start this topic with a riddle, and that's okay with you all. And please, if you can solve this riddle, I'd love you to take yourself off of mute and give us the answer. The Carnegie Mellon record is about 10 seconds for solving this riddle, and I will tell you when we go. Okay? All right. So here we have the Sun. My favorite television show is CBS Sunday Morning. So they always have different suns. So I'm going to start now. We have an old fart, we have an old car, and we have Old Glory. Right? Old fart, old car, Old Glory. Okay, you can't. I don't know if you can see me, but I'm doing the NBA. Get across the center court line. I'm up to 5 seconds. Come on, we need a record breaker. Who's going to break the record?
Is it Nothing New Under the Sun? Awesome.
Who was that? Alex Marshall?
Yeah.
You're the winner. You get a T-shirt. Unfortunately, I can't give it to you because we're online. But you're going to get a fun
imaginary T-shirt.
Yeah, the Swartz made the Swartz be with you. Congratulations. That's right. There is nothing new under the sun. What entrepreneurship is about is taking fundamental concepts and putting them together to create a new combination. But the elements that we're using are all existing in most cases. Not that there aren't new inventions, but those new inventions are based off of old inventions. So really, I just don't want you to think this is some new concept. And I'm going to tell you where Lean and Agile came from. So thank you, Alex. Great job. I'm going to say you tied the record, even though you were maybe 2 seconds behind, but we'll put you up on the leaderboard. Okay, so there's a concept that some of you may have heard of, and it's Kaizen. Kaizen. Who wants to raise their hand and tell me what Kaizen means? Somebody? Anybody? Come on, lean in. You've heard it, I'm sure. Many of you have heard the term Kaizen, but what does it mean? Okay, well, it's a trick question because I put the definition right on the slide. It's rapid, continuous, incremental improvement, right? Secular, right? Rapid, continuous, incremental improvement, right? It's a mindset of how we achieve quality. right? And how many of you know where Kaizen originated? Who invented the concept of Kaizen? Please just lean in. Tell me your thoughts.
Japanese.
Japanese. Okay, that's a good answer. We heard the Japanese. Anybody else?
I'll guess the German. Yeah.
The Germans. Okay, that's a good answer. Any other thoughts? I heard countries. What about companies?
Toyota.
Toyota. All right, I've got 3 answers. We can play this like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you can get a lifeline. Why don't you call somebody, call your mom and ask her if she knows. I just got a Donald Trump from the background. No, it wasn't Donald Trump. All right. Going once. Going twice. All right. None of those answers are correct. But they're all good answers because all of them used it. See, the origins of Kaizen were out of tragedy, quite frankly. In World War II, the U.S. and Japan were at war in the Pacific, and Japan, unfortunately, was decimated, and their industrial capability was torn to the ground. And so there was a plan that was put together to help rebuild the industrial capability of Japan. And for the first time ever, we had a clean sheet of paper to start from. And so the U.S. government, provided some resources to the brilliant Japanese leaders of industry to put together a plan to build that industrial capability back up from the bottom. And it was captured in a training field called Improvement in 4 Steps, which is in Japanese, and I'm not a speaker of Japanese, but I'll do my best. Kaizen Onyon Dankai. And Kaizen actually truly means improvement, right? And the author of this process, and it had many authors, but the lead author was a gentleman named Edwards Deming, and the international award for quality is called the Deming Award, right? So it's important to understand that this was a collaboration, and the first real implementation at scale was called TPS. And does anybody know what TPS stands for? The Toyota Production System. So Toyota was a good answer. Japan was a good answer, as was Germany, because similarly there was a parallel plan called the Marshall Plan going on in Europe to do interesting things. So the whole concept of Kaizen became lean and agile, right? We're going to continuously work to improve what we're doing, right? We're not going to sit, back then at a drafting board or today at a CAD system and design the very, very best physical plant that we can. We're going to learn by doing. And that's really, really important. And we're going to listen to all of our employees and the feedback that they give us about what's happening so that we can use that to improve. And therefore, everybody on the team feels like they're contributing to the success of the entity. There's a great quote: people tend to support that which they help to create. Very important. And that's at the core of Kaizen, lean, and agile. And over many, many decades, this capability improved. And by the early 1990s, Japan was probably the most efficient manufacturer in the world. And they continue to be a leader there. But we have seen other countries' capabilities in manufacturing rise up. The software world took notice of this in the 1980s and 90s and started to apply this capability, which came to a sort of a seminal event called the Agile Manifesto in the year 2001. And the concepts that were put into this, and it was done by Sutherland and Schwaber. Sutherland was an engineering company that did CAD software, and Ken Schwaber is known as the father of Scrum, one of the lean startup kinds of tools for agile product development that you'll get introduced to through these Connects workshop series. And what's important here, by the way, if you want to fall asleep fast, go grab the manifesto and read through it. It's a lot of fun. But they have important concepts there. Is that it's individuals and interactions over process and tools, right? It's working software prototypes, getting it into the field over comprehensive documentation and plans. It's customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And that's where customer discovery comes in. And that's what you guys are going to apply in the I-Corps and Innovation Fellows programs. And then it's responding to change and learnings instead of following a plan off of a cliff, right? And these are the important things that came out of that. And so while the software world was seeing this startup world started to take notice too, because so many startups are software based. And so it comes to sort of a question that was core to the startup world. And that is, why do most startups fail? Why do they fail? Well, it's stark. The NVCA about 5 years ago did a study of failure. And by the way, does anybody know what the startup failure rate is? Sort of the collectively agreed upon startup failure rate?
96.
96? That's a good number. Anybody else? Think about that. 96% of startups fail. Well, the NVCA did this study of even later stage startups, and they found out that even those startups that got Series A, Series B money, right, that were picked by venture capitalists who are supposed to be the smartest people in the world and can see the future and can say through their crystal ball that this startup or that startup is going to succeed, 70% of them failed to return capital to the investors, right? So even the ones that make it further down the line can fail. So the answer to the question is, does anybody know why do most startups fail? There is one major reason that outpaces all the other reasons. There are multiple reasons, but there's one.
No market fit.
No market fit. That's a later condition to the answer to this question.
No customer discovery.
No customer discovery, right? They don't talk to customers early and often enough, right? And what you're going to learn is that your product or service, in whichever way it manifests itself, doesn't matter. That's not what's important. And most, especially technical people, get enamored with the technical solution that they can provide. But what matters is that you're solving a real problem for real customers who are willing to pay you now to get it, right? And your physical manifestation of your product is not important. It's the value in solving the problem for the customer that's important, right? So we have to start to think about that way. And one of the first Connects workshops we did was about design thinking. And the design thinking concepts and techniques are the things that you need to use in your customer discovery to learn if the problems are acute enough and large enough that it's worth your time, your most important asset, to go down the path of solving that. And we can talk more about what that means later, but it's really important, right? Your most valuable asset as an entrepreneur is your time and what you know, right? And you want to apply that to situations that are going to be successful rather than ones that end up in the 96% or the 70%, right? And the best way to do that, and we'll talk about this concept of product market fit a little bit later, and 0 to 1, 0 being the idea, 1 being product market fit. How do you get there? Because the failure happens most often in that period of time. So, okay, one of the concepts that's come out of the whole lean startup world is this concept of MVP. Does anybody know what MVP stands for?
Minimum viable product.
Minimum viable product. No, it stands for most valuable player. It always has and it always will. That they staked claim to that many, many years ago. So at Carnegie Mellon, we don't say MVP. We say MAP, minimally awesome product, right? We don't just want to be viable. We want to be awesome. And that's really, really important. And Sean Ammirati, who is a partner at Birchmere Ventures and is also a professor at Carnegie Mellon, is going to talk about the whole building of prototypes and products, and that, you know, you have to strive to really capture the hearts of your customers. And you can't do that with something that's just minimally viable. You have to do that with something that's awesome and captures their attention and makes them want to use and therefore pay for your product. Okay. Now, of course, MVP's out there and we like to make jokes about these things, but we really do want you to transition in your mind from thinking MVP to be thinking MAP. Very, very important here. And so what this kind of means in the process is that customer development, starting with customer discovery there on the bottom left, is just as important as product development. They happen together in lockstep. We don't build something and then throw it over the fence to the potential customers to see if they want it, right? So the minimal viable product in lean startups was a concept that was developed by Steve Blank, who works with the NSF, Eric Ries, the person who wrote the Lean Startup book. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And Tom Eisenman, who's a professor at Harvard. They had sort of taken these terminologies and turned it into a process. And so what it means is that on the left, we have our customer development, which includes the first step of customer discovery happening in conjunction in a virtual or a virtuous feedback loop with our product development. And on the right there, this is represented by the extreme programming kind of technique. It's one of the many techniques that you can use to do rapid prototyping, right? So we're continuously learning from our customer what their problem is and what the potential solutions are. We're not driving a solution down their throat. We're co-creating with our customers the solution that solves their problem. And so what we say here at Carnegie Mellon is customer development meets agile product development, and that is the lean startup, okay? So now back to our riddle. There's nothing new under the sun. Alex Marshall solved this riddle for us and in record time. Way to go, Alex. But I'm here to tell you that this whole lean startup stuff is not new. It's something that every single one of you learned, at least at the middle school level, if not the high school level of your education. And it works because it is based on first principles. Does anybody know what it is that you learned that is the absolute foundation and underpinnings for the lean startup? Think back to middle school. You're in the lab. First time you had chemistry lab or physics lab or just science lab. What did you learn? All right, in the interest of time, I'm just going to answer the question. You learned the scientific method, right? And the whole lean startup approach is nothing more than the scientific method applied to business. We start with a hypothesis. We have a hypothesis of what the customer's problem is. And through our early customer discovery, we design an experiment. It can be just interviewing. It can be focus groups. It can be A/B testing. We test our hypothesis of the problem. And if we, through that experiment, can validate that the problem exists and it's painful enough that the customer is willing to pay for it now, then we validated the problem. So we move on to the next step. We have a hypothesis of what the solution is, and we introduce that solution to the customer on that specific problem. And we figure out through this rapid prototyping, we start with low fidelity prototypes to high fidelity prototypes to minimally awesome products over time. We continue to go through this continuous, rapid, incremental improvement. Kaizen, right? These things all tie together. And when I went to Carnegie Mellon 30 years ago, we did the same damn thing. We just had different terminology and we had different level of sophistication of tools. Obviously, we've progressed rapidly here into the year 2020 and have all kinds of really great tools at our base. But we started with an idea. We determined its feasibility. We didn't call it customer discovery, but we went and talked to customers, right? Then we prototyped and we verified that the design worked and it was solving the problem. We demonstrated it to the companies who were our customers, and they got buy-in, and then we scaled it up, right? And I learned this from that old fart that we had in the beginning, right? That old fart, and he, I don't know if you guys can see this, but I call him Yoda, right? Doesn't he kind of look like Yoda? I think he does. He's the Jedi master of all things entrepreneurial and financing. His name's Frank Demler. He is also a professor here. He was my professor 30 years ago. If you want to understand how early stage financing and investment works, he's the guy to go to. But he taught me this exact same thing. And in my first startup called IndustryNet with Don Jones, we applied it. We didn't call it customer discovery. We didn't call it minimally viable product or minimally awesome product, but it was the same concept. So the successful entrepreneurs, the 4% or the 30% that become very successful, they do customer discovery right. They do product development to solve the customer's problem, not to stroke their own ego, right? Because they created something cool. It's different. If you want to do side projects to create something technically cool, that's an awesome thing to do because it builds skills. But if you're going to build a company, the company exists to delight its customers. And if it delights its customers, it will collect revenues. And if it's smart enough to make sure that the cost of building the product is less than it is from the revenue that they can collect from the customer, then they're successful. That's called profitability. You'll learn about that in the business model canvas. But I wanted to give you the underpinnings for our approach and the why. What I'd like to do right now is actually have do a quick video from Eric Ries, who founded this concept, and have him tell it to you in his terms so that you get a feel for this. Okay, and this will take about 10 to 15 minutes, and it's really excellent.
I would like to start today. I'm Eric Ries, by the way. I write the blog Startup Lessons Learned, which hopefully will show on here. The hashtag is Lean Startup, if you would. Thank you. I would like to ask all of us a simple thing, which is to stop wasting people's time. And here's what I mean. We all know that startups fail. We're accustomed to that. I thought I'd bring a demonstration. This is Web 2.0, circa 2006, when our enthusiasm was at its peak. A graphic designer put together this patchwork quilt of logos. And then I also brought what I consider to be our midterm report card. It looks like this. This is Web 2.0 circa 2009. You can already see the blood red X's of all the companies that are no longer with us. And yet the designer also made an interesting choice to mark with green circles the supposed successes of Web 2.0. Those are the companies that have gone IPO or were acquired, which means they were acquired.
SPACs now. Oh.
And which is another way of saying those are the companies where somebody made money. And I'm all for people making money. But my question for today is, how many of these supposed successes succeeded in living up to the raw talent, passion, time, and energy that the founders and employees poured into them? And I think by that higher standard of success, we're not doing very well as an industry. And in case you think I'm just picking on startups, the same statistics hold true in new product introductions in the enterprise, in the supermarket. It's true of corporate IT projects. And I don't think it's because we're taking too much risk. On the contrary, I think we're taking not enough risk because we are building products that fundamentally nobody wants. And that is a preventable condition. Now, that is what, when I say stop wasting people's time, that's what I mean. We are building faith-based initiatives, and that's not a good idea. We are taking untested, unvalidated assumptions, and we are pouring people's time and energy into them. Now, lest you think I'm being negative about entrepreneurship, you should know I think entrepreneurship is awesome, and that this thing we call software, internet, Web 2.0, is changing the face of work in this world. Software is imagination made tangible, and because of that, it has nonlinear effects in every industry it infects. And that causes disruption, chaos, lowering of barriers, and stress for our friends who are in established businesses, but tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurs everywhere. And in the last year, as I have traveled the world talking about this thing called the lean startup, I have gotten to see that there are now more practicing entrepreneurs on this earth than have ever been in the history of the world. And those entrepreneurs are not necessarily going to make any money. Let's be honest. Entrepreneurship is not a good way to make money. I'm sorry if there's some of you for whom that's bad news. But entrepreneurship is a noble calling. It combines uniquely among careers three simultaneous things: the ability to change the world for the better, the ability to create lasting value, and also make customers' lives better, all at the same time. And yet, it is these very entrepreneurs who are wasting people's time building something that nobody wants. And I think in order to stop that from happening, we have to put the practice of entrepreneurship on a more rigorous footing. And the first step is to begin with a definition. So here's mine. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. Notice I didn't say anything about what industry you're in, or what sector of the economy, or even the size of company you work at. In my travels, I have gotten to meet many very talented, involuntary entrepreneurs who tried to take a safe job at a safe company in a safe industry, but then discovered there's no such thing in this world. So anyone who's trying to create disruptive innovation under conditions of uncertainty is an entrepreneur. That's not a metaphor. And that's just a fancy way of saying a startup is an experiment. An experiment not just in can we build a product, but should we build it? And more importantly, can we build an organization, a sustainable organization, to support that series of products and services? And the funny thing about that definition is it means that entrepreneurship is management. Because when we think of management, most of us have a very 20th century view of what that looks like. We think of general management as was practiced in the 20th century, the general management that powers the supply chains that, let's face it, keep us all alive. But I believe we need a new management science, entrepreneurial management, not better or worse than general management, but different, geared specifically to the principles of extreme uncertainty that is the soil in which all entrepreneurs live. And the first of those management principles I want to talk about is this thing called the pivot. The pivot is a word that's gone a little bit mainstream this year. It's entered the zeitgeist. I knew when I saw this in the New Yorker, I don't know if you can read this, it says, "I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to a new man." So sorry about that. But that cartoon actually has a certain wisdom to it, because what entrepreneurs do when they have a vision and encounter difficulty is they don't just give up on the vision, but they don't just persevere the plane right into the ground either. They keep one foot firmly rooted in what they've learned so far, while systematically changing one other thing at a time. And that's why successful entrepreneurs do not have better ideas than unsuccessful entrepreneurs. They have superior process. And they have this kind of zigzaggy path from initial idea to eventual success, which only in retrospect looks nice and linear, or unfortunately, when you read about it in the press. And the premise of the lean startup is actually very simple. If we can reduce the time between pivots, we can increase our odds of success before we run out of money. Because what matters in any entrepreneurial situation, from the garage to the enterprise, is not how much money do I have left, but how many pivots do I have left? So if we're going to stop wasting people's time, we have to learn to pivot faster. And yet, the fastest way to iterate is just to go around and around in a circle. That's not helpful either. We have to know, how do we know if we're making progress or just engaged in forward motion? And that is the enduring conundrum of entrepreneurship, knowing if I'm making progress. The lean startup takes its inspiration and its principles from lean manufacturing that confronted the same question. How do we tell the difference between value-creating activities and waste? As I mentioned at the top, Many startups are actually building something that nobody wants. And if you're building something that nobody wants, what does it matter if you're on budget and on time or on schedule? Why are we using milestones and schedules to manage something which fundamentally is uncertain and has, many cases, a fatal problem at the root? Instead, we need a new definition of progress, what I call validated learning. And I'll share with you how I came to that conclusion. This is how I was taught to do product development as a software engineer in Silicon Valley. It's called the waterfall methodology. I'm sure many of you have tried this. I was taught this as the manufacturing metaphor for software development. And you can imagine how pissed I was when I found out that they don't even use it for manufacturing anymore. So what's our excuse for doing it in software development? It's ridiculous. And the waterfall methodology is easy to pick on because we've had quite a lot of time to study it. But it's important to remember that the waterfall methodology does work when you're in a situation of the known problem, known solution. That is, when you're making something that is very similar to something you have made in the past, you can't have this linear sense of progress through a pre-existing plan. That's why the unit of progress of waterfall is advancing to the next stage. As long as we're doing what we said we were going to do, we consider that success, even if what we said we were going to do was stupid. And that is what leads to this problem we call achieving failure, when you successfully execute the plan, but the plan takes you right off a cliff. Now, the last 10 years have been about this thing called Agile product development. And I've shown here, this is extreme programming, which is my personal favorite of the Agile methodologies. And Agile has the important insight that if we change our unit of progress to a line of working code, we can stop achieving failure. And this point of view works when the problem is known, it's the solution that is unknown, which is often the case in corporate IT projects where Agile has had its biggest impact. So if we create specification documents that nobody reads, or documentation that goes stale, or create software with bugs that then have to be reworked, all that constitutes waste, and Agile is a way of eliminating that waste. Unfortunately, startups don't live in this world either. They live in this world. The unknown problem and unknown solution. If we're gonna sit a customer, an in-house customer with the engineers, what if we don't know who the customer is yet? What if we don't know what problem we're trying to solve yet? There's a lot on this diagram I can't go into today. You can learn more on my blog. I just want to focus in on this idea of the unit of progress called validated learning. And I'll just tell you a story. I founded a company called IMVU, and the very first version of that product took us 6 months to build. And I was the CTO of the company. It was my job to be responsible for the technical architecture, and I don't want to mince words. The first version of this product sucked. Okay, it was every bit as likely to crash your computer as it was to give you your delightful consumer 3D avatar experience. And I was personally embarrassed to ship it. I was like, oh God, people are going to use it and think, we don't know what quality software is. I had this image of a journalist writing this article, idiots launch software, don't know about quality. But turned out I needn't to have worried. Some of you already know the punchline because you've done this too, because of course nobody used the software. We couldn't even get people to download it. So they couldn't even discover how buggy it was. And it was my co-founders who had to drag me kicking and screaming to the realization that we'd actually built the wrong product. We had once again built something that nobody wanted. And let's face it, I was depressed because I was the guy who had written, 40,000 lines of code to build that initial prototype, almost all of which had to get thrown out. The good code and the bad code alike. Failure is a great equalizer of quality. And then I said, wait, are you telling me I would have contributed just as much value to this company if I had spent the last 6 months on a beach, on vacation, as I did killing myself to get this prototype out? I said, no, that's not true. Because if we hadn't written all this code, we wouldn't have learned this important thing about customers. So then I felt better. And then I had this dark thought that plagued me, which was, but if my goal of the last 6 months was to learn this important thing about customers, did I really need 40,000 lines of code to do it? Is there no way I could have had the same learning with 20,000 lines of code or 10,000? And then I was like, wait, what if I had just asked some customers if they would like to download this product? After all, 0% of them did. Would I have learned the same amount in 1 week as I did in 6 months? And that led me to this. This is the kind of the flux capacitor of the lean startup, if you will. This is the fundamental feedback loop that powers all startups. The build, measure, learn feedback loop. We take vision, we turn it into action. Through that action, we reveal the truth about our vision and we iterate. And from this diagram, I can give you a heuristic for evaluating any process or managerial or architecture change in a startup situation, which is, does it minimize the total time through this feedback loop, or does it sub-optimize by helping us do only our narrow job function well. Most of the management practices that kill startups violate that simple rule. And with this diagram, I can now put the concept of a pivot on a more rigorous footing, because I can say a pivot is one full turn through this feedback loop. Now, there's a lot more to the lean startup. It looks like this. These are all the specific tactics and techniques that we teach. You can learn about this online if you're interested. What all of these techniques have in common is my belief that they operate at one specific stage of the feedback loop, but they have the effect of minimizing total time through the feedback loop. In other words, they help us stop wasting people's time. And before I close, I want to share one last thing. This is actually a full circle moment for me. I first talked about the lean startup in public 1 year ago at the Web 2.0 Expo right here in San Francisco. And since that time, what began as a movement of high-tech entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley to increase our odds of success has really blossomed into something much bigger, a movement that I believe is dedicated to stop wasting people's time. You may be familiar with this. This is the Gartner hype cycle. The lean startup has reached almost the top of the peak of inflated expectations. And I am sad to say that I think we're coming on the trough of disillusionment pretty soon. So I apologize for the hype. That's not my goal. And because of the hype, there have been some misunderstandings about the lean startup that have become somewhat prevalent. I actually believe being misunderstood is a big step up from being ignored. So thank you. And I want to address those misunderstandings because each of them reveals a deeper truth about what we're trying to do with this movement. And so I thought I'd just talk about them briefly. The first is that lean means cheap. And people who feel this way really don't understand that lean has a specific word, a specific meaning in a business context. Lean is about speed through that fundamental feedback loop, not bodies in motion, but validated learning about customers. Lean startups actually accelerate as they scale instead of grinding to that bureaucratic halt we're more familiar with. The second myth is that lean startup is just for Web 2.0 internet consumer software companies. That's my background, so that's an understandable understanding, but there are quite a few other theorists, Steve Blank, Dave McClure, Sean Ellis, who come from different backgrounds who have been part of this movement. And I think we're starting to get the word out. As I said at the top, any business that faces uncertainty about what customers will want can benefit from these techniques. The third myth is that lean startups are somehow small bootstrap startups. They either they lack ambition or they take pride in being cheap. But our goal, remember, is to create a human institution that can grow, that can change the world, that can have an impact. And in fact, as our friends in the venture community are starting to learn, when we actually understand what customers actually want instead of just what we hope or think they want, we actually have the ability to deploy large amounts of capital more effectively than in traditional models. And last, this is the most pernicious, that somehow by incorporating data or feedback into our entrepreneurial process, we seek to replace vision with data. And as I said right at the beginning, entrepreneurship fundamentally is about a vision of the world as it might be. And what I think is odd is that if we really believe those visions, if we really believe the world needs to change in an urgent way, then I don't understand how we can afford to be engaged in a faith-based initiative. I don't understand that. If we have assumptions that are essential to the success of that vision, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the world to test them against reality, to see what actually is possible, and, of course, to stop wasting people's time. So here's how to get in touch. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
So I appreciate you sitting through that and listening to Eric's explanation of the lean startup. I think there's a lot of good lessons in it and getting ideas from different folks. So the lean startup concept is how we approach building of startup companies at Carnegie Mellon. And I want to just sort of make available to you a couple of key points to be thinking about as you go through these iterations of building your company. There are three failure modes that happen in this 0 to 1, idea to product market fit. And they're important to think about going into it. The first one is the false positive. And we talk about this concept of convenient sample, talking to people that you can get to easily, family members, friends, but inevitably that failure mode is that your friends, your family, they want you to succeed. They don't want to give you bad news, so they pat you on the back and say, well, that's a wonderful idea. I'd buy that, right? When they had no intention of ever buying that. So you need to get out and talk to real customers and interact with real customers that you don't know, that aren't going to tell you how wonderful what you're doing is. The second is the signal to noise problem, right? We hear this all the time from entrepreneurs. Oh, I talk to 100 different customers and I'm getting different results from the different segments of people that I talk to. And typically that's because you introduce some sort of bias to the interaction unknowingly, right? It's an unconscious bias. And the most common one of these is introducing your solution too early when you don't really understand their problem, right? So signal to noise is the second big failure mode. And the third one is your product sucks, right? And we'll talk about this as we go forward, but you have to have something that is different and compellingly better or compellingly cheaper than what is next. And the way that we talk about that here at Carnegie Mellon is a concept called the goodness factor, right? Goodness means better, right? Cheaper, faster. Factor means measurable. We can measure it. And my first co-founder and my mentor for life is a gentleman named Don Jones. The Don Jones Center for Entrepreneurial Studies is part of the Swartz Center, and it's all of the academic activities that we have. And Don taught me this concept 30 years ago, and it is unfailingly right in every situation. Just amazing. And it's very simple. What Don said was, if you're going to enter a market that has an existing solution at the same price, then you have to be 3 times better. Or if you're offering the same value, you have to be 3 times cheaper. And the why is that because people are lazy, but in a good way. The great habit force of life is hard to break. Once you have something that works, you just stick with it. Unless there's a compelling reason to change. And Don said that compelling reason is that it's 3 times better or 3 times cheaper. And let me give you an example. And the longer at CMU, the further away this example gets, but it still works. And in 1998, all of the pundits declared the search wars were over. We have 5 search engines that serve the market and they're all good enough, right? We had Alta Vista, we had Excite at Home, we had Lycos that was here from Carnegie Mellon, a successful company at the time, right? But in 1998, something did happen that changed the world. Does anybody remember what that was? What happened in 1998?
Google
happened, right? And if you're, those of you that are a little bit older might have remembered the first time that you used Google versus another search engine, and it was like wow, this is so much better immediately, right? And then everybody switched to Google. And so we go forward, roughly 20 years from now, and there is validated research that Bing is actually better than Google on many dimensions. Anybody in here, please shout out, I use Bing. Anybody? Wait a second, if it's better, how come nobody uses it? I usually get one person say, I use it. And I say, well, you work for Microsoft, right? And inevitably, it's tied back to something like that. Well, if Bing is better than Google, then why don't people change? The answer is it's only a tiny bit better on certain dimensions, right? It's not compellingly better or compellingly cheaper to use than Google. So everybody sticks with Google. And so this is a challenge that you're going to face, is that any problem worth solving for customers when you're a startup, they are trying to solve some other way. So you need to be 3 times better or 3 times cheaper, or you won't be successful. Well, I believed in the goodness factor. I still believe in the goodness factor. But a couple of years ago, there were 2 books that were written, maybe 4 years ago now, 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I recommended read. And then The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz, the co-founder with Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz. Ben's telling you that you're number 1 there on the cover of his book. And they make the argument in this 0 to 1 idea to product market fit that it's no longer good enough to be 3 times better or 3 times cheaper. You have to be 10 times better or 10 times cheaper, because the proliferation of these technologies like, the internet, open source, cloud, have made so easy to develop potential solutions to problems that it's so noisy that 3 times better or 3 times cheaper is no longer good enough. 10 times better, 10 times cheaper is important. So going forward, as you go on this journey, you're going to have to keep thinking about this. Can we make a product or a service that is 10 times better or 10 times cheaper? Don't focus on that number as much as that it's compellingly better or compellingly cheaper, right? That's important, because the numbers are different for every industry. But the consumer products industry is really locked into this, and they find one element of their product that they can claim is 2 times better or 3 times better or 6 times better. Look at consumer products that you buy and look at the advertisements. They know that if they can't capture your attention with that compellingly better argument, that they have no chance. Okay, so I'm going to make an argument here too, and this is important in your customer discovery, that there are quantified benefits are important in the goodness factor, and there are only 3 benefits in the world that matter. And then you as an entrepreneur have to focus on these 3 benefits. Does my product or service deliver these 3 benefits? Anybody want to take a crack at what they are? These are fundamental. These are things that you know, and when somebody says them, you're going to say, yeah, I knew that.
Cost.
Cost.
Time.
Time. Saves time. Saves money or makes money, right? So you have to be thinking in terms of your customer. Am I saving them enough time, or am I saving or making them enough money? Okay. How about the third benefit? Anybody?
Better.
Better? Well, better in terms of those first 2. Better in that it saves me more time. Better in that it makes me more money. I call this one the Zuckerberg benefit. Back in 2005, this nerdy Harvard computer science major couldn't get a date. So he created Facebook, which hooked him up, right? Let's be honest, that's what Facebook was about at first, about finding somebody to hook up with. Now, it's evolved into something much more. By get your minds out of the gutter, everybody, right? Everybody's getting their Tinder out. They're swiping left, they're swiping right. No, it's about relationships at a high level. And in the business context, relationships are customers. Relationships are suppliers, or partners, or investors, right? So a benefit that gets more relationships that lead to more business success are important. And that's it. Those are the only 3 benefits that exist in the world. And people like to argue with me about it, but go ahead, try to argue with me. I'll be Joe Biden, you be Donald Trump, or vice versa. Is this true? Are they the only 3 benefits in the world? What about fame and recognition? If I make somebody famous, isn't that right? Well, why do people want fame and recognition? Because they want to make more money, or they want to get hooked up, right? Same with altruism. And every person I ever know that walked around as being altruistic, they were just trying to find a date. And I'm joking, of course. And it's not true. There are many benefits in the world. There are many benefits that are complex. And those complex benefits, like fame and recognition or altruism and doing good, they mean different things to different people. So if we're going to be a nobody that nobody sent, we have to focus on communicating with our potential customers in terms that we both understand. So the fundamental unit of time is something we understand. The fundamental unit of money is something that we understand. And finally, the fundamental unit of additional relationships, the next customer, the next investor, right? Those are benefits that everybody understands. So when we give our elevator pitches or we're selling to a customer, we have to communicate to them that we save them time, we save or make them money, or we get them the relationships that matter. Very, very important to be thinking about as you do your customer discovery.
How about being different?
So being different how?
Like, for example, if I make a product that doesn't save anyone money or time, it's just some people might want to look different than others, and like going, for example, into luxury sector.
Right. So a lot of that time is that people want to show off that they have more money, or that they're rich and that they should be respected, and that's like a hookup, right? So you want to express it in a simple terms, something that everybody's going to understand. Now, if you can take that benefit that you just described and break it down into ways that they can benefit from these three things, you're going to be more successful. Otherwise, people are just not going to understand. And I have 30 years of entrepreneurial experience that makes me know that experimentally this is absolutely true. And there's lots that's been written about it in the business press, so you can go check it out. But my charge to you, Salah, is think about expressing the benefit, the value of what it is you're providing in these terms, and you will be more successful.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the tools that we use are common tools. The business model canvas that was created by Alex Osterwald is a great tool. And if you haven't, I don't remember when that connects is, but I think it might be next week. We use this tool to help us keep everything in front of us as an entrepreneur and to keep our founding team on the same page. And on the right, the customer segments are who are the customers that we're serving and what problems do they have, right? And then in the middle is what is our offer? What is the value that and benefit that we provide to the customer that makes them want to use our product and service? And then we start filling in about how we get our product and service to the customer, how we maintain those relationships. At the bottom of the right side, how we measure the value through collecting revenue streams. On the left side of the canvas are the different ways, the key resources, the key activities, the key partners that we need to build the product or service and deliver it. And the cost structure is how much it costs to do that. And the business will be successful if our revenue at the bottom right is greater than our cost at the bottom left. And this simple tool is incredibly powerful to help you along this journey of getting from 0 to 1. Okay. Now, I've gone over time. I really apologize. I'm so glad that most of you have stayed with us. I will stick around and answer some questions now. But if you have to go, I totally understand that we were only scheduled for an hour here today, and you won't offend me if you've got to drop off. So thank you so much for coming. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that we can see each other. And the close here is that we are using this as a structure, as a framework to approach the problem. Everybody's situation is differently, but number one, delighting our customer is the most important thing. Solving a problem that they have that's so acute that they're willing to pay for is the most important thing. So that's why we do our customer discovery. And there are many, many different techniques out there to do it. The easiest one is a customer interview. And most of you will start by doing customer interviews. But if you're going to be good at it, be a student of design thinking and learn the different techniques like customer shadowing, contextual interviews, focus groups, A/B testing. There's a whole host of them out there, okay? And when you're proposing your solution, think about it, am I compellingly better or am I compellingly cheaper? Because if you're not, people won't switch, okay? And use tools like the business model canvas to keep your team on the same page. The easiest thing to do in the early stages when you have 3 people, a hacker, a hustler, and a designer on it, is for you all to go out into the world and do customer discovery and change your minds about things, but not share that with your co-founders so that you all remain on the same page. And the business model canvas helps you do that. So I'm so excited for you all to be on your discovery here. the Swartz Center hopefully will open soon on campus. We're knocking on wood. CMU's been really good at managing COVID, so hopefully we'll get to interact together. And those of you that came to boot camp and Alex will get your T-shirts. We're excited about that. And then we want to help you on your journey. The NSF Corps programs, the Innovation Fellows, the Swartz Fellows, the Innovation Scholars, all of these are programs to help you be successful, to help you manage your most important asset, your time. All right, I'm open for questions. Allison, do we have questions in the chat? Can you?
Dave, I have a question.
Okay, Mola.
Yeah, so I mean, this has been really good for me. I know you've worked with us for so long on putting some of this together. So now, and even hearing this connects has been kind of helpful. So the real customer and the real person with the pain point is corporations that want talent.
Right.
Like all of these other things that we've been pushing has really been, okay, you want the potential employees to feel like where you work is a great place. That's the social responsibility aspect.
Right.
Or you can't find enough people to do a job that are native born. That's the diversity aspect because you need to build the pipeline. Or you want people to have these skills, and that's the training and upskilling aspect. And yeah. I've been doing a lot of secondary things in this I-Corps. So now I'm faced the conundrum of, okay, so how do I now start targeting? Because I'm like, really, it's the corporations. And then I saw what Amazon was doing, and they're now going to target 8,000 schools, but they're going to give away their software for free. So when you're talking about 10 times better, I'm like, if you don't have a corporate partner, you can't even sell your curriculum, because if Amazon's going to partner with Georgia Tech to give it away for free, how are you going to say, oh yeah, buy my solution? Right. So it's like, how do I now go through customer discovery? Because I feel like now you have it. There is things not being done. Right. So how do I get to the questioning?
Yeah. So reminder to everybody, Damola is working with underserved groups and minorities to help them develop technical skills. They do it through a curriculum and events, and ultimately the goal is to have those students trained so they can be successful employees at companies. And so, Damola, you ask great questions. I agree with you because I've been pounding on this issue for a long time. That's the customer, the ultimate customer. So let's take that offline and get into some detail on that. But it highlights a really important point, is that the world is complex, and we have to think of our customers in different segments, right? Who's the ultimate payer? Who's the ultimate user? And in Damola's case, the users are the students that are developing skills, but the customer who is paying is the corporation that wants to hire those students. So important to keep those things in mind. Any other questions?
Dave, I have a question. Yeah, thank you so much. It was a really useful talk. I have a question regarding this lean startup methodology and the sort of opposing views by Peter Thiel on and you actually covered this, like having this goodness factor 10 times better. But he was always skeptical about these lean methodologies and MVPs. And like minimal viable products, especially one thing that I sort of also thinking about it these days is that how can we like apply these lean methodologies in hardware, which has very low marginal error, like when you make a product.
Well, let's unpack that, because there's a lot in that, even what you've asked so far. First of all, Peter Thiel he just uses different language to approach it. What he says is that a startup needs to create a natural monopoly, right? Meaning that they define the niche market that they're serving and they dominate it, right? That's no different than finding a very acute problem and being the first to serve that, right? It's just different language, and it's the same general concept, right? Now, the second question that you asked was about hardware. Hardware is on a different timeline. I work with a number of different hardware companies, but the importance of customer discovery and getting and solving the right problem is even higher for a hardware company because of these timelines and because of the cost that's necessary to go through the iterations of your prototypes, from the lowest fidelity prototype, an MVP, to a minimally awesome product, to a beta, to a version 1, right? The stakes are higher in hardware, but the same framework of making sure that you're solving a real problem and that the customer will pay for it as you go through the cycles is important.
Right, but the MVP for like the MVP.
It doesn't have to be an electronic product working. It can be a storyboard, right?
Right, but then it might not be 10 times better. Like in your vision, you might have a product that is 10 times better, but your prototype might be maybe like 1 time, like 2 times
right.
better.
So you have to be able to convince your customer that you can get to the point where it's 10 times better. And so the way that we work as startups with getting feedback from customers is we get testimonials early on where they give us quotes. And so that a next customer can say, oh, that customer's like me and they're getting value. Then we move up the scale and then we do case studies where we collect data and we show that we are creating that 3 to 10 times value. And then further, as we get more customers and we come out of beta to version 1, we do now what's called ROI, return on investment, where we collect the data over time. At the beginning, it's a vision for what the value is going to be, and we do a simulation. We do a spreadsheet that has our assumptions that can prove, if the assumptions are true, right, can prove that we can achieve that 3 to 10 times better. Then we take it to the next step where we actually implement it with a couple of customers and we collect the data. And then we have multiple customers, we can show a data validated return on investment. So that's the sort of process. It's the vision of the entrepreneur to start in a simulation, collect data, do case studies, get to a data validated return on investment.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Because I know we're now 1:40. Oh, I'm 20 minutes over. Thank you all for sticking with us. Greg, it's good to see you. I hope the Innovation Fellows program is doing well for you. And hopefully we'll see all of you soon. And if you have any questions, please reach out.